Okay, I think I will go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Braun, and I'm the curator at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. I am so pleased that you could join us for today's presentation by Adrian Balseca, which is being hosted in conjunction with the exhibition Andean Modernities Contemporary Art, Cultural Transformation in Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia. Through works by 5 contemporary Latin American artists, this exhibition explores themes such as environmentalism, religion, migration, and architecture to expose the tensions between past and present, indigenous and Western, tradition and modernity that characterize Andean identity today. The show is co-curated by Caroline Wolfenson Diego, Associate Professor of Romance Languages and Literatures at Bowdoin College, and students in the class, The Modern Worldview of the Andes, Art, Literature, Architecture, and the Environment. Tomorrow afternoon at 1:30, Professor Wolfenson and student co-curators Julia Line and Leif Maynard will be offering an in-person tour of the exhibition here at the BCMA. I encourage all who are tuning in remotely to join us then, or come and experience the show on your own before it closes on Sunday, March 5th. Now to turn to our speaker. Adrian Balseca is one of the artists featured in the exhibition, and we are delighted to welcome him this afternoon. An interdisciplinary artist who works in photography, film, sculpture, and installation, Adrian creates work that draws from extensive historical research, especially in relation to environmental extractivism and its impact on land and people in South America and the Ecuadorian Amazon. His projects have ranged from small interventions to large-scale site-specific installations that address topics such as emerging economies, environment and nature, power, and social memory. Adrian has participated in more than 20 solo and group exhibitions, including Rethinking Nature at the Museo Madre in Naples, Italy, the 34th Sao Paulo Biennial, Though It's Dark, Still I Sing in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Plantasia Oil Company at Galleria N24 in Quito, Ecuador, Cosmopolis No. 2, Rethinking the Human at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, The Unbalanced Land at Galleria Madragoa in Lisbon, Portugal, and Estela Blanca at Ginsberg Gallery in Lima, Peru, to name but a few. His book, Mirador, Visions on Extractivism, Ecuador 2007 to 2017, was published in 2019. Adrian has received many awards, including honorable mention at the 14th International Cuenca Biennial in 2018, the Mariano Aguilera National Arts Prize from the Center for Contemporary Art in Quito, the Cisneros Fontanals Art Foundation Grants and Commissions Program in 2015, and the Paris Award at the 12th International Cuenca Biennial, among many others. He recently completed a residency at the Delfina Foundation in London in 2022. This afternoon, Adrian will plan to speak for about 30 minutes about his artistic research. After that, we will welcome questions from the audience using our Q&A feature, so please feel free to add your questions at any time. Please also note that we're recording today's program. So without further ado, I am delighted to turn things over to Adrian Balseca. Adrian, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much, Casey, for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to share with you this afternoon some of my thoughts and projects on these, how could I call this long-term project that I've been researching for almost now 6 years. But first of all, I would like to thank Professor Caroline Wolfenson for inviting me for the show and all the team behind the Museum of the University that was really helpful producing this show and this presentation and display of the Skin of Labor project in this really special project that basically we start talking with Professor Caroline probably now 1 year ago. So thank to all of them for helping me in this process. I will share the screen now to start talking a little bit deep about the project. It was called The Skin of Labor. It's a project that is actually the beginning of a whole body of research in my practice, dealing with the history of rubber extraction and the impacts, not only in terms of environmental impact, but as well in social political impacts on land and territory. Till 2016, almost all my practices are dealing at that time with the extraction of oil and the history of oil boom, specifically in Ecuador, and all the environmental implications and social implications related more or less in the Amazon jungle and the Amazon region in South America. I've been working on different kind of videos, film, documentaries, photographs, and installations dealing with that extractivism agendas of what I could call a kind of a petrocapitalistic environment that is a petrodependence that Ecuador grows up in the last 70 to 25 years. But in a certain moment, I decided to move backwards to try to get a better knowledge and get a better picture of what configures and create called extractivism paths in the Amazon region. So I decided to look backwards to the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th centuries with extraction of rubber and what it happens in the region related to this really complex moment of the history dealing related to the extraction of rubber in the Amazon jungle. So the first project that I present as a kind of a response to this research was called The Skin of Labor. That basically as a kind of a contrast between archives and documentation with my own experience in territory when finally I got the chance to travel and visit this natural virgin jungle of natural rubber trees, and experienced by myself and talking with people and communities in Napo province in Ecuador, and got the chance to contrast what I've been like learning and researching till almost 1 year through all the 2016, and finally almost at the end of 2016, I finally got the chance to travel to this specific region in the Amazon jungle of Ecuador, and I got this opportunity to share some of my knowledge or what I have been learning till that time with the people. So basically, there are two really important moments to understand the extraction of rubber and all the economic agendas involved in this path of production of rubber. The most well-known, of course, is the rubber boom taken at the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of 20th century, that I will discuss lately. And what is really interesting for me as Ecuadorian that actually pushed me to start diving in these archives and dealing with this history. Say the first Western that discovers the rubber and the properties of rubber, natural rubber in the Amazon, Charles Marie Condamine. That is a mathematician and geographer that he been working with the French expeditioners, the geodesic expeditioners, to determine the center of the world. And after living 10 years in Real Audiencia de Quito, where is now Quito, Ecuador, he decided to get back to France, and he bring a whole team of people to get through the Amazon jungle in order to reach Guyana Francesa, and finally took a ship back to France. In that journey through the Amazon jungle, what at least I have read, he became the first European to start a journey through the Amazon jungle. He writes in his book his experience traveling in these areas. We need to think at that time the configuration of some of the republics doesn't exist yet, and some of the borders are not delimited yet. But at that time, Charles Marie La Condamine, in what is probably some of the banks of a river in between what is now Peru and Ecuador, he finally saw some indigenous communities that are not specifically described which one it is. He described the usage by this community of natural rubber of this specific white resin that comes out of these amazing huge trees. And he saw that these communities have been working, creating different kind of objects, a kind of a boots, a kind of a balls. And he documented it and makes some drawings of it. He makes some annotations and makes some notes of all this experience. And he brings some of the objects that he found made of natural rubber. And he traveled finally and gets to Guyana Francesa. And a French mathematician, he both built what is probably the first academic paper on rubber that detail all the specific productive possibilities of the extraction of this white resin coming out of the tree. And this paper, when Charles Marie La Condamine finally reached and get back to France, he introduced this document and this academic paper by Louis Franois in collaboration with him, and became probably the very base of knowledge of the extraction of the possibilities of extraction of rubber and the possibilities to create manufactured goods coming out of this resource. So at the beginning, it really interested me, not only extraction or extractivism as kind of a certain possibility to deal with materials in land and with nature, but as well thinking extractivism, and in this specific case, extractivism as the extractive of knowledge as well, coming from this knowledge that was taken out of these indigenous communities. And again, another thing that really interested me at that time is thinking that this French expeditioner and mathematician first traveled to Quito, to Real Audiencia de Quito, in order to the of the world and the length of the equatorial line. But in that journey, in that travel, he discovered and became the first Western to saw these properties of this material. So I start collecting a lot of archives, a lot of different images along different kind of books, and make this past of this Western expeditioner and this Western scientist in what is now again Ecuador, and the implications that 100 years later this knowledge will have and create all the whole system of extraction, basically by British companies. So I started collecting all these kind of different materials and all these kind of different, really interesting for me, representations of the Equatorial line with manufactured goods that has been produced with natural entry. So specifically with the case of the skin of labor, at the beginning I went to deal with a really specific object, that is the rubber glove. The rubber glove was invented at the end of 19th century as well, in a certain moment that not only the science but the second industrial revolution, wants to bring better conditions to their workers, let's say, and there's a lot of riots and a lot of problematics related to the conditions of the workers in factories, in the centers, in Britain and in States. And in a certain moment, the invention of this recovery of this scheme to get better conditions in the work came out. And at the same moment, it was really interesting to understand that the whole system of labor that was established in the Amazon region and what is now is today Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and Brazil, the natural rubber and this wide resin to produce these manufactured goods came from a different kind of a perspective of labor that for our contemporary art is definitely close to an slavery process. We need to think that the end of 19th century, the Amazon region in all these countries are living in a slavery process where thousands of indigenous communities in all these different countries are living in exploitation situation, in a slavery process, in order to collect these natural material for most of them British companies. So at that time, I'm really interested to see this cultural object and to try to understand what it means. Solution the globe, and I'm trying to create an encounter, let's say, between this manufactured good and the land and the territory where the material of this manufactured good was taken out. So that brings me this idea to, for one side, start research and seeing if I could find like the original molds to produce these first molds of rubber globes from the beginning of. So finally found one mold of it, and I produced this black rubber glove, and I finally find a way to get to this region of Ecuador. That is Pastaza in Napo province that you could see over here in the map. So after a whole year working and trying to understand the logistics involved in this, if it is possible or not to travel to Orellana, and we lands and which specific territories was involved in this scenario of rubber extraction. I've been researching, and finally I understand that some of these natural rainforests are today forests that are like in domain and called by oil companies. And one of the ones that I was really interested in at that time was the 16 block that was monitored and controlled by Repsol YPF. Repsol YPF is a Spanish oil company, one of the most important oil companies working till these days in Ecuador. So in order to get there and got the permissions to film in this territory and in these lands, in this gigantic rubber trees forest, I need to present my passport, first of all, in the Spanish oil company's headquarters in Quito, located in Quito, Ecuador, and talk about the project and of what I want to do over there. And then when I arrive to Orellana, I need to present, and all my crew, my film crew, was required to present the in the capital in order to get in an Amazon territory, in these Amazon fields of rubber trees. For give you an idea, today the Amazon production, the production of natural rubber in the Amazon jungle is not longer working. There's a lot of different breakdowns and bankrupts in different moments of the history, but today is not longer possible to see a proper crop or a proper company, let's say, of rubber working in the Amazon jungle of Ecuador, at least. And there's some harvest of rubber, but it's more or less in the coast region, and that close to the Pacific Ocean. But that crops are, I will say, plantations. They are not like these extensions of natural rubber trees like the ones that you found in the jungle. So for people there, for the locals, are quite strange to have these people interested in this specific kind of extension of trees. The story is well known, let's say, but no one wants to talk about it. And at least in the Block 16, again controlled by Repsol EPF, is not necessarily like is not the most important, let's say, extractivism agenda. Today, the extraction of oil is a permanent. It's important to understand that Ecuador till these days are living with a petrocapitalistic the main economy, the oil till today. So when I travel to these territories and I contrast and I start talking with locals and I try to visit for first time all these lands, was quite complex. One was really awful to get through all this process to present me and my crew and the passports and I being like feeling this sensation to be a foreigner in my own country. So really after that, I got like the second chance to travel, and in that second attempt to travel to the Block 16, again, probably 1 kilometer from this amazing forest of rubber, you could find like the pipes and the oil drills of Repsol that are quite strong. And the devastation that you could saw at that moment of the whole economy of this company in this territory is huge. Finally, in this kind of and an amazing territory. At that time, when I want to deal with photography and moving image, I decided, okay, I want to create and get close to aesthetically talking to the very first representations of the Amazon jungle that till that moment I've been able to search and watch by myself in different archives. One is the National Film Archive in Rio de Janeiro. I visit and I got the chance to explore and think some of the films that was shot in Brazil. And the other experience was the amazing opportunity to watch probably one of the first films shot in the Amazon region by Jesuit priests. We shoot a different kind of perspectives of the botanical new discoveries, let's say. All of these films, both of the films that I found in these different archives are 60mm films, are black and white films, of course. And in my impression, more or less, the approach to the shooting material is more or less a kind of anthropological perspective. For one side, you saw a lot of material that are trying to bring some of the knowledge of the common daily life of specific communities living in that areas. And in the other side, you could find a lot of attempts to shoot and film the natural behavior and the natural species all around, not only animals, but as well all the botanical species that. So when I decided to create this project, I want to create a kind of I could call it like a kind of a fake archive. So I want to create a kind of a phantasmagorical fake archive of these emptiness, of these remainings of the indigenous slavery process that Ecuador lives at the end of 19th century. And I want to create this, again, this kind of encounter between the manufactural good of the rubber glove hanging in these trees, collecting drop by drop this white resin coming out of this rubber tree. These are some of the stills of it, but I could show you a little bit of the film itself for ones that haven't got the chance to visit the show. The film is a silent film. I was really pleased to produce finally this approach to this natural rubber trees forest in the Amazon in Sucumbíos province, and shoot and got this chance to shoot in a 60mm camera, using a 60mm camera, that finally for me creates this very specific aesthetic that drops me out of what is today the representations of the Amazon jungle as well, that as you saw, more or less are satellite images of the territory. Some of the images are captured using drone, and we got like this god of view of the territory and land that is quite
Adrian?
complex. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you, I think, stopped screen sharing, so we're not seeing the video right
really?
now. Yeah, maybe just try sharing your screen again. There we go. Thank you.
Great, sorry.
Nope, no problem.
So yeah, for people that haven't visited the show yet, basically this is a digital scan of the film that are now projecting at Andean Modernities exhibition. And what I'm saying is like this is interesting in my practice to get up closer to film for very first time till 2016 till the mid 2016. Almost all my in digital cameras in order to create my narratives and my different projects. This was basically the first time that I was using film, and I was using a analog camera. Till now, I moved from digital cameras. Skin of Labor is the beginning, and I still using 60mm cameras to different projects. But in this case, again, at the beginning, the idea was to, okay, let's create this phantasmagorical fake archive closely to anthropological aesthetics and archives materials that I found of natural rubber. But as well, what I'm really interested in here, when I saw the result of it, I edited by myself in Berlin that same year that I shoot the film, is that the lenses that I use in the film and the feeling that I want to create here in the film is a really closely production is a thing that you could saw really closely all the details of the object hanging in the trees, all the leaves of the tree, all these white resin coming out of the tree. I think that again, when you saw contemporary representations of the jungle, we now are seeing all these satellite images. We've seen all these God view images generated by drones. So I really like this opportunity to recognize and see the Amazon jungle very deeply and very closely, you know. And that's a thing that I really love about the Skin of Labor film as well. But another thing that is really important here is that in terms of the mounting and editing of the film, there are two here. One is in between images. In certain moments, I turn down and turn on the camera. So you see this kind of a white image coming in the film, like that one. And in other moments, I cut it, the stills of it by cutting the film itself, the material itself, that you couldn't see because it's basically a plain cut. And that's a thing that is really interesting for me to think this cutting or this tapping of rubber out the resin of the rubber trees is kind of a metaphor that I use as well in the editing of the film itself. One is related to the machine of the 60mm camera, turning on and turning off, and to cut the different shoots. And in the other sense is yes, using this sensation to cut the material. Maybe I can show you some other images of it. So yeah, these are some of the stills of the film. The project I presented for first time at my former gallery in Lisbon, Portugal, where was my first solo show in Europe as well. These are some of the images of that exhibition. It's really a monochrome exhibition, black and white, 35mm photographs that you could show are now in display at the museum. And a center projector in loop projecting the film itself. And in one of the walls of the gallery, I present as well the object, one of the objects that he used in the film, this rubber glove. But in this case, the rubber glove is completely empty. It's not full of rubber, like in the one that you saw in the film. And this is interesting because, well, the Skin of Labor, probably I mentioned a lot of times, but is the beginning of this research on rubber extraction. Again, because in 2016, I got like a lot of doubts to keep talking about the extraction of oil and the extraction of mega mining, open air mining. And I need some distance in order to try to get like a better understanding of what really configures and create these different extractivism paths in the Amazon jungle. Definitely to understand today Amazon development in Ecuador and the creation of highways and the relationship with companies in territory, if you couldn't search and learn about the extraction of rubber as one of the beginning of this corporative understanding of extraction in the Amazon, because it definitely shaped these extractivism agendas in territory. So the development, again, in some of the main capitals in the Amazon region of Ecuador are really related to the Amazon rubber extraction in the Amazon jungle. Sorry. So if we got time, I could talk a little bit more about other projects in that follows the same path of research.
Yeah, maybe at this time, maybe we can just invite members of the audience to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and please start typing in questions. But yeah, Adrian, I actually had a question that maybe will start you off down this path, which was that I really appreciated how much you shared about the sort of historical and archival research that went into creating this body of work. And you focus specifically on the skin of labor as sort of the series that immediately followed, you know, going to these film archives, doing field work in Orellana. So I'm just curious if this has this research has continued to influence your work and how it sort of evolved from the Skin of Labor series. So maybe if we could just start there, and I will invite the audience to start typing in questions. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, basically, yeah, again, the Skin of Labor is the beginning to deal with archives, dealing with research on rubber from the first botanical illustrations from Jean-Marie Condamine and Luis Frenat till contemporary advertisements. So the material is quite huge. Let's say, there's a lot of material there in the research, and I feel is a kind of ongoing interesting in my practice and ongoing research, because each year I found different materials. I work more or less in this way of artist as a collector. So each year I move from different territories, collecting different materials that again are like creating a bigger archive. So each year I found different. Okay, I found this postcard. Okay, that each year I'm like renovating my own research. The Skin of Labor is the beginning of talking about rubber extraction. It's not the last project that I produce in that field. And again, I feel it's not like I don't have like a final conclusion. Still interesting in dealing with this history. So currently I'm not necessarily working on rubber extraction anymore, but as you mentioned at the beginning, yeah, last year I got the chance and the opportunity to travel to London to be part of the Vina Foundation residency. And at that time, of course, I want to deal with the rubber history as well. So I visit the Kew Gardens. I visit because I want to get close to the other side of the history. I got like probably 5 or 6 projects dealing with the rubber history and the extraction of rubber in the Amazon jungle, shooting and talking and documented from the Amazon jungle perspective. But for that very first time, I got the chance to deal with another side of the history, you know, in UK. So for giving an example, the project that follows up the same body of research was the Stella Blanca that I produced in Ginsberg Gallery in 2019. That basically was my first solo show in Lima in Peru, that of course had like a really strong history related with the extraction of rubber. So when I was appointed to present the solo show there, I want to bring some of my own research as Ecuadorian to Peru in order to expand different perspectives, because the most well-known history of rubber extraction probably is Brazil, of course, because of the dimensions of this massacre and this slavery process over there. But of course, Colombia, Peru is a huge place of that. We got like a really important relevance in the history of rubber, and as well Ecuador have their own history. So when I was appointed to present in some of my research in Lima, I want to bring some of my research on the Ecuadorian case. And I finally worked with a family that they are from a Amazonian community called Wao. They are Guaranis. And this family moved at that time, I guess, was years to live and establish in the coast region of Ecuador, really close to the Pacific Ocean in a province called Santo Domingo de los Áchilas. And they start working not in a rubber forest, but they start working in a crop of rubber trees. That is all of them got like a strong an ancestral knowledge of extraction of rubber, and the grandfather of the family been working more or less in a kind of a slavery process for a British company when he was like a kid, and all his family are related to this extraction history. So as I mentioned, do the first bankrupt of rubber extraction in the Amazon jungle in 1912. Basically, this family was pushed out of the Amazon, and then they traveled to Santo Domingo de los Áchilas to start working and have a life over there. So at time that I'm visiting there in this huge crop in the coast region of Ecuador, some of the kids asked me to create this kind of a huge motorbike that they saw in a meme in the cell phone of her mother. And they know that I'm an artist. So we started creating this kind of a huge motorbike made using a trunk of rubber tree that basically is not longer used. And we create this installation. And at the end of the whole experience, I take a photograph as long that the photographs are not following this really problematic representation of the indigenous communities using their own traditional customs. No, so it's really showing them as a urban, of course, community. No, part of they got like their own heritage and of a part of a specific community, but they are not feeling anymore like a part of a Wow culture. They are, of course, living in these really specific condition. They're completely urban. So these are some of the images of the installation in the gallery. I present Incisiones project, a photograph documentation of 100 of different photographic slides. Some of them you could see over here, that are showing different tire tread patterns that I engraved by myself in a chunk of wood of a rubber tree. And this basically is a kind of a collection of different tire tread patterns by different companies from to Goodyear, Pirelli, all of them well registered and patent. But when I create this kind of engraving in the chunk of rubber trees, becomes this kind of a allegory of Latin American abstraction for one side. To other side reminds us some of the paintings of some indigenous communities in the Ecuadorian Amazon regions. See, these are some of the drawings that I made of this series. Again, you saw the tire tread tree and taking out this resin milk on pots. That is more or less close to 19th century kind of a botanical sketches of it. Or for you an example, for the 34 Sao Paulo Biennial, I was appointed to create a new project. So I created this new commission that I decided to title Bad Year, do the 2020, really specific year that we've been living through. The biennial at that time was postponed. But at the end pops up in 2021, and I create this assemblage of different cast of a natural rubber. This is the first time that I've been working actually with the latex, with the white resin that comes out of the rubber trees, in order to create these fragments, let's say, again, using different tire tread patterns from different companies, probably the main ones that get involved in the destruction of rubber in the Amazon, in Brazil, of course. And I create these, these really light, fortunately, pieces of fragments of rubber tires that find us a kind of archaeological, let's say, display of archaeological pieces, but as well are playing with this idea to present fragments that you are not longer, you don't no longer understand if they are like tire patterns, or they are indigenous patterns for paintings, or what they exactly is, but they are presented like a kind of a archaeological display of pieces, more or less talking about this sensation or this feeling of the end of the world, of a kind of a civilization that was extinct, and this is the remains of these modernity pieces hanging in the wall. This is in the Bienal Sao Paulo as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was
from different ways.
Thank you for sharing those additional projects. I think they're sure will generate even more questions, but for right now, we do have two that are sort of waiting to be asked. So the first one comes from Frank, and he asks, in the Skin of Labor series, why have you chosen to work in black and white?
Okay. Yes, probably I mentioned really brief, but at that time, I was really interested to get close to the static representations that are you could find of the first representations of the Amazon jungle. So in 2016, I got the amazing opportunity to visit two different film archives. One is located in Quito, Ecuador. It's and the other one is like the Cinemateca Nacional of Brazil, that is located in Sao Paulo. And finally, I found like an office in Rio de Janeiro, where I got the chance to dig on these archives. These representations, both of them are 16mm films that are at that time, I guess, are productions from the 20th. And both of them are black and white 16mm films. The difference of them are they are dealing with different communities. One are a community of in Brazil, I couldn't remember the name of it, but it's located in Paraná. And the other one is from Shuaras communities in Ecuador. These antique films are more or less a kind of anthropological approach to represent the territory, and they are dealing with this specific daily life of these indigenous communities, how they cooked, how they fishing, and different kind of material, and as well showing a little bit about a monkey or a different kind of a plant and the usage of this community of these plants. But all the films are black and white. All of the films are 16mm films. So when I decided, okay, I want to create this project dealing with this late 19th century history, I want to create this kind of a fake archive in a way. So that's why I choose to use the same, let's say, technique And that's why I get close to film to produce this project, and that's why I choose black and white, because it's a 16 millimeter 3x black and white film.
Thank you. We have another question, and there's a few parts to it, so I will read it out. This is coming from Anne Goodyear. She says, Adrian, thank you for a superb presentation. Could you please speak about the ways in which you believe artists can enhance or understand our understanding of history? How does the work or approach of a professional artist differ from that of a professional historian? Is part of this use of images versus words? Does it have to do with asking different questions? Are there other distinctions, again, between sort of your work as an artist versus a historian that you feel are important?
Thanks for that question. Very interesting. For me, it's really interesting to approach to history in terms that history itself and historians not always are creating different this kind of a crazy links between material. In my case, again, I try to relate not or not that sometimes are not creating really clear, or some associations or links that are not probably so visible. So artists, or at least I could talk by myself, I'm trying to create this kind of a cosmology of materials, of different layering of histories, and put it together in order to create that associations or things that are in the history but probably are not so well known. I'm talking like these images, for example. I don't know if you're seeing the screen now. Is a postcard by a New York coffee company from the beginning. This one is a sketch by Charles-Marie Condamine and Louis Renoir from the 18th centuries. These ones are advertisement of rubber tires from the 20s. So more often these days, I was accompanying and presenting and displaying my projects together with a kind of a publication or a takeaway newspaper that reunites in a certain way some of these visual materials together. For me, it's definitely important to deal with history, as long as it's not possible to see forwards to a future without trying to at least approach and trying to have another understanding of history. History as like the extraction of rubber in Ecuador is probably not the well-known history. There's some really interesting research, academic research on it, that are trying to create a better understanding of that conflict, but they are like quite recently, let's say, not more than 20 years, and some of them are recently published. So when I create this kind of association between the Equatorial line and the rubber extraction, the implementation of modernity and the creation of highways, like you could see in this advertisement, for me, it's important to create this possibility that art allows us to create other ways to understand history that probably are not well developed or not are well studied yet by history and historians, and with a more flexible way, let's say. But definitely couldn't, again, keep talking in my projects and keep talking in my artwork about today contemporary extraction and environmental and social impacts and struggles without trying to understand what it configures that problematics now. So that's why in this case of the rubber research, I decided to look backwards and trying to expand my own knowledge about the configuration of the modernity and the creation of of this extractive impact in the Amazon jungle, in order to, again, to try to understand my present, but looking forward for new understandings and possibilities to understand these struggles in history. I don't know if my answer is quite clear, but yeah.
That was great. Thank you so much. And it's honestly, it is hard to believe, but we are pretty much at time for our program. And I think you did a beautiful job answering that question. So Adrian, I want to thank you so much for sharing more about your research and these projects that you have been working on. We are so delighted that you participated in the exhibition, and that we now have work for you in the Bowdoin College Museum of Art's collection that we can continue to bring out for exhibitions and for teaching. So please, on behalf of the entire campus community here, I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who was able to join for this wonderful conversation this evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Casey, and thanks for having me here this afternoon.
Great.
Thanks.